My name is Carissa Brewster, staff writer for Whitman Partners, and we are presenting today the 40 Fast and Future Leaders of Surgical Services for 2022. And today we have Gregory Koulisis, who is the Director of Surgical Services at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome, Gregory.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I think many institutions, no matter what your size is, if you're a small community hospital with 6 ORs or you're a big academic teaching facility like Beth Israel, we have 40-something surgical rooms here. One of the tensions that we're going to face, or we're facing right now, is the increase of the flu, RSV, and our what is this, like our 10th wave of COVID. So our inpatient numbers are increasing, which means we don't have beds for our surgical patients. So we're all probably going to be facing some decisions operationally on whether or not we have to pause some of our elective procedures and focus more on those urgent or emergent situations. So I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. I think, on the news, there's been discussion about staffing shortages across the nation, across the globe, really. So you combine that with a low census of surgical volume and increased need for staff, your numbers are going to kind of fall, to be expected. And then to add some more pressure, I think across the globe and across the United States, we're facing that global supply shortage of many different types of products. And it's not necessarily that the manufacturer isn't able to produce them in a timely fashion. Is that we have a lot of raw resources that are not available or being ate up by other industries. Silicone is one that comes to mind of recent, and so many of our surgical soft goods are made with silicone or other types of plastics. So that can create a significant backlog of cases or having the supplies you need to run the operating rooms. And I think another tension point, that comes to mind is while we're kind of decreasing the elective surgical volume, we have a strong desire from our physician colleagues to increase our block time, right? To run rooms longer on more than one day, and then to open up maybe additional rooms on the weekend so that we can get through our backlog. So I think right now that those are really pertinent and timely as tension points. So I think, in 2022 and beyond, or even a couple of years before this period, everyone has to get creative with staffing solutions. I believe that we have a lot of stakeholders who are more open-minded about what type of candidate should come into the OR. I think for an academic teaching facility, there was always a focus on registered nurses, must be a registered nurse, but expanding that to include licensed vocational nurses or LPNs is one creative way, and partnering with those academic institutions that are kind of in your surrounding geographical areas. So working with community colleges, working for LPNs, working with LPN schools, other tech vocational schools, and then of course your regular 4-year universities that are around as well, and opening the door before they graduate. Get in there, go to a career fair, go in with your goodies and talk about how great of a facility you are and why the culture is so strong and healthy. A lot of folks want to talk about the dollar, and the dollar is important, but knowing that you're treated as a whole person and knowing that your time in the OR and out the OR or outside the OR is just as equally important to your leaders, I think goes a long way. Everyone has to get on a bus to get home to feed their dog or take care of a parent or their child. Not being so stringent with discipline and counseling. If someone has to leave 5 minutes early so they can get a bus now instead of having to wait a whole hour and 15 minutes, that goes a long way. So reminding each other that we're all human and we all have obligations outside of work, and supporting your employees inside and outside is, I think, one of the strongest tactical points to do. And another creative solution is partnering with different military organizations and veterans organizations. So we have a lot of different reserve components with our military, right? We have the Navy, we have the Army, we have the Air Force, Coast Guard even. Marine Corps doesn't have too much healthcare. They have some behavioral health technicians. But opening the door and inviting them in to shadow and see what it is to be in a civilian hospital, maybe after they come off active duty, and doing some bridge programs. Or in the state of Massachusetts, anyways, if you are trained as a surgical technologist in the military, you don't have to have your certification. We will exempt you and we'll bring you on board because you're an experienced surgical tech. So I think there's a lot of creative ways to work with external organizations, but really focusing on that humanistic relationship approach is the best key.
Yeah, two things you mentioned stood out to me was I've spoken with a lot of veterans that ended up being working in healthcare, and when they got out, they couldn't do what they did in the military, and so they had to go back and get that education, which is somewhat of a waste of time, and also you lose that experience at the facility. You don't get to utilize that person. So your idea is great. I've never heard anybody suggest that.
I'm a veteran myself.
Yeah.
Got plenty of friends, who've experienced what you just mentioned. There were a lot of barriers, I think, prior to COVID, but I think it's kind of opened people's eyes that everyone is of value and that experience, it does matter. It's not everything, but the relationships that you create with these other organizations, again, is the most important thing.
Yeah. And then the other thing was just letting people know that the OR is an option. That's another thing I've heard where people that ended up being in perioperative, they're like, oh yeah, I just happened to walk past this table and saw this pamphlet, and it's like they didn't know it was there. And a lot of them, once they get in there, they like fall in love with it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's actually to piggyback off that, we have a Periop 101 program here, which is for, non-experienced nurses and LPNs. Now we're doing an LPN program. So if they're a fresh graduate and they've never been to OR, and years past, they would never have been a candidate. They would never have been allowed to come in because they didn't have that experience. So creating like these nurse entry programs has been really wonderful to say, we don't mind if you haven't worked in the OR before. You also haven't worked in med surg as a nurse. Like, we're going to teach you what you need to know. Like, we want your people skills. We want the way you communicate with each other to be strong and healthy, and everything else will come with time. So that's been really great. So I do think once you become a director of any type of department or unit within a healthcare setting, that it's really important that you have a basic understanding of margins and revenue and spreadsheets, and that if you don't, that's okay, but to find your partner within your organization who can help you understand. Sometimes interpreting numbers for forecasts, for example, can help you make better decisions on what type of products you actually need and what you don't need, and how to streamline some of those concepts. So, for example, we have a materials OR store counterpart down here that does our supply ordering, and they're not clinical folks. They order based off of what is not on the shelf. So getting your forecast reports to learn, oh, I have a par level of 35 of these on the shelf, but we're only stocking, every 3 months. That's a low utilization rate. So it's maybe a product you want to think about getting rid of, or identifying another product that can be used in the same manner. And you maybe have some cost savings there. You'll save on shipping or freight or other things like that. But depending on how your system is set up, you may very well have a business partner, like a director of perioperative business, or just a senior business manager. So I think building those relationships and having an understanding of those concepts is more important. Having the motivation to learn about them, not necessarily coming into the role, having that all under your belt already.
Can you think of any, like, I don't know, educational programs or classes that maybe someone could take if they were kind of really motivated to like get something formalized in terms of under the belt?
Yeah, so there are many programs out there. I think you choose your cup to drink from, as far as what organization you choose. There are many free organizations that you can take some online courses. LinkedIn comes to mind. They have a bunch of free classes from project management to Excel spreadsheets. I think you definitely need to know Excel. I think you definitely need to know how to filter and create formulas in there. That is a must. But I think that's a good baseline, starting with some of those free programs. And then as you get more invested in your career, taking on a higher level of education through a certificate program, whether it's a community college or an Ivy League Wharton Business School online that costs, thousands of dollars, that may interest you because of the people you're interacting with and the experience they have. So some of those university programs, it's again about relationships and networking and learning what has gone well for others and why, and maybe taking some of those clinical pearls and applying it to yourself. You might not get that in a community college setting, but still you're being educated and you're climbing that ladder and you're really solidifying your foundation to build continuously on. My first piece of advice is slow down. Slow down. You do not need to be in a rush. You need to slow down. Part of that is taking the time to learn about your staff. You have to learn about the culture of the unit that you're inheriting. If you're going to a new organization, you can't walk in there expecting that what worked well for you at your last place of employment is going to work at the new place of employment. It is night and day, and they can be so subtle. I can give an example where at a prior facility I worked at, you might share an idea or a concept at a meeting, and someone might look at you and say, that's never going to work. That's just not going to work. And you kind of take it at face value. You learn that that's the culture. It's kind of blunt, professional but blunt. Where when you move to a different organization, someone might not say that to you, and they might speak to you through high-level communication, which makes you have to infer what they're trying to communicate. So someone might say at your new place of employment, that's very interesting, but I have a few concerns, which is saying the same thing as the first person, but in a very different way. And if someone's not familiar with those nuances, they might not realize that, oh, I need to slow down. I need to think about what I just said and why is this not hitting other stakeholders the way I had intended. So learn your culture, learn your shadow organization, find a person who has years of experience with that organization so they can give you a historical perspective. We can't walk in and say, this is wrong, or how did it ever get to be here? The question is, what were we doing before? What changes were implemented? Why did that work or why did it not work? So having that well-rounded perspective is really going to make you a much better leader. And I think another thing is a lot of senior level managers or new directors, they don't take the time to learn their staff names. It's so impressive when you walk in after day one and you can recite or rattle off 10 staff members' names. And you should know everybody's name. It shouldn't just be your surgeons. It shouldn't just be your nurses or your techs. You should know who your OR attendants are, your perioperative techs, your unit coordinators, your EBS housekeeping folks, the ambassadors at the front desk. You want to present yourself in the best way possible so you can keep building those relationships. Yeah, so I've been onboarded a couple different places. I'd say that there's some overlapping themes that I think went well. One of those themes is that I was essentially given an onboarding package, right? You have your basic HR orientation, that's fine. Your basic policy, your basic 10 classes everyone has to take every year, environmental safety and your codes and things like that. But separate to that, I essentially was given a list of different stakeholders throughout the organization that I should meet. And some of them in the beginning were set up for me. But after about 2 weeks, I was kind of, my reins were taken off and they said, okay, you've been here a while, you kind of know the campus a bit, go ahead and reach out to people. So being the first person to reach out for an introduction was, I think, really wonderful because it allowed me to introduce myself in the manner that I'd like to be perceived, making sure it's humble and, coming from a place of respect and maybe a little bit of appreciation for knowing what the role is and saying, oh, you're the VP of EVS, like you have a tough job. I'd love to sit with you and hear about your experience and how we collaborate together within surgical services, what's going well, what could be better. And kind of you already set the agenda when you reach out first. So I think that was a really healthy way to onboard someone. And then I don't think there was a lot of pressure for me to get caught up to speed. My senior leaders really let me take my time and kind of let me figure out where I wanted to focus first. I'm more of a metrics and numbers guy, so I wanted to know, what's the FTE of the OR? How many vacancies do we have? How many travelers do we have? What position's been open the longest? I wanted to see all the job descriptions because I didn't want to fall into that trap of, oh, this role at my last hospital, this was their practice, and then having that expectation here or that false assumption, because even though the job title is the same, their job descriptions were not. So like having that information was really helpful to like realign what my false assumptions were and what my expectations should be. It also let me open the door to saying, hey, I noticed that, this isn't on anyone's job description. How can we have such tight condensed descriptors. Like, why don't we have some more vagueness instilled here so that we can create new opportunities for this role down the road? It was a great onboarding.
Was there anything that was missing that you might add to that process?
I would have liked to say I wish I had my office right away. I was kind of without an office for quite a few weeks, so it was difficult to hop around to different like workstations, especially with like, taking Zoom calls, and some of them were sensitive in nature. And I just think that's an institutional barrier. We're all pressed for space. And there was an interim person in this role while I was onboarding, so this was also their office beforehand. So I get that. But I would have loved to have my office, on day one. I can't say that there are a bunch of things that people wouldn't think of offhand. I think if you've been a surgical services leader, I think they're kind of very obvious. But I guess an outlier that people don't think of as the first thought is your onboarding program itself. If you don't have an onboarding program that has successions of training, maybe from a novice skill set to, beginner, intermediary to competent to expert or whatever, you're going to push someone through orientation, and when they're off orientation, they're not going to be prepared to scrub that surgery by themselves or circulate that surgery by themselves. So they're going to ask for extra resources to come to the room to help assist them. So, making yourself a center of excellence around high performance teams and your different surgical service lines, like building a list of these are my 5 most complicated case types in plastics. These are my 5 most complicated case types in ortho, and so on. You build that program and you ensure that while you're onboarding someone, they hit all those intrinsic cases so that when they come off, they feel ready that they can move right in there. And then even the fashion that you're putting someone through services with your clinical nurse educator, recruiting, retaining, training, that's big money, huge money, thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of your facility. But if you push someone through ENT, but they've never done some type of transsphenoidal biopsy with neurosurgery, they're not going to be prepared to do that case. And now you're going to have to double up the team. So your onboarding is a really big deal. So I could say for sure, we have generational differences. I don't think the OR or healthcare specifically stands out. I think it's just human nature. When you consider, baby boomers and the Generation X and Generation Y and Generation Z and millennials, you have to think about all these different dimensions that affect them as an individual. I think for dimensions, one of them to think about is the time frame of their life that they were raised. If someone experienced the end of World War II, or they experienced Vietnam, or they experienced the wonderful economy of the early 1990s, they are affected very differently than someone who graduated college in 2008 during a recession, who couldn't find a job for several years. And they never really had a source of support in the way that those other generations did. And there's some good things about that, and there's some bad things about that. I think one of the bad things is we as individuals fail to appreciate those generational dimensional differences. And we don't have to say that everyone who is a boomer is the same person. And we certainly don't want to say that everyone who's a millennial is the same person. But we want to be cognizant about how the global platform has maybe affected them. Gen Z tend to be more sensitive about the environment, and we, being a social group, and what's good for one is good for all. Where maybe Generation X or boomers were more independent, and I want to get ahead by doing X, Y, Z. If I work a lot, I expect to get this. Now, as far as those dynamics go on the OR floor, we have some folks who are not being socially aware of those differences, and that can create friction, certainly. But at the end of the day, I think when it comes to my relationship with staff, I do treat everyone as an individual, and I don't lump people into different buckets. Being aware of the different celebrations that occur on a monthly basis, whether it's Pride Month or Hispanic Month or whatever it might be, is taking the time to recognize those things, I think goes a long way. and making each other cherish and appreciate our differences, you know, and honoring that the diversity, equity, and inclusion platform, and taking it a step further by having the J for justice, right? We want to all be treated the same and have the same principles and be treated fair. And it's a good group here. I mean, I can't speak about everyone else, but we have a healthy dynamic.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gregory. It was nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today.
All right, take care.
Thank you.